Hi friends, it's Mrs. Carrera, and we're going to read Can You Keep a Secret? Chapter 3. All right, here we go. The first thing Mike heard when he came through the door was dumb old Trent saying, "You better not tell Mike, he'll tell the whole school." That made Mike mad, but he tried not to show it. He hurried to his desk without looking at anybody. Mrs. Banks told him about Mr. Warren's birthday. Mike thought the party was a good idea, but he thought writing poems was a lousy idea. Mike was good at lots of things, drawing, sports, science, and he was great with computers, but he was bad at poems. Everything he wrote sounded dumb. He knew the kind of poem he wanted to write, but he just couldn't write it. When the class wrote poems, he had to get somebody to help him. While people were getting out paper, Nate looked back and asked, "Did you get in trouble?" "Yeah," Mike said. "I have to stay after school." "It's better than having a note sent home," Nate said. "Last time I got a note, it was no TV for a whole week." Mike took out a piece of paper. Then he sat and looked at it. He felt really stupid. Everybody else was writing already. Nate slapped down his pencil and said, "I'm done." "Let me see it," Mike said. Maybe he could get an idea from Nate. Nate held up his paper so Mike could read it. "Hope your birthday's great, your friend Nate." That didn't seem like much of a poem to Mike. But he said, "That's neat." Nate looked at Mike's blank paper. "What's the matter? Are you mad at Mr. Warren?" "I can't think of anything right now," Mike said. "Give me your paper," Nate said. "I'll write one for you." "I can do it," Mike said. But Nate reached back and grabbed his paper. While Nate was writing, Mike looked around the room. He saw Sam raise the lid of his desk and reach inside. Sam was petting something. Mike was sure of it. "Here you go," Nate said. He set the paper in front of Mike. "It's a good one." Mike looked at the poem in front of him. "Hope you get presents you like, your friend Mike." That sounded dumb to Mike, but he said, "Thanks, Nate, it's neat." "No problem," Nate said, "as long as you have a good rhyming name. If your name was Charles or Oscar, you'd be out of luck." Mike felt out of luck anyway. He looked across at Britt's desk. Britt was drawing hearts and flowers around the edges of her paper. Britt always wrote good poems. Maybe he could get an idea from her. "Britt," he whispered, "can I see your poem?" "Okay," she said, "but hold it by the edges. I don't want the ink to smear." Mike took Britt's poem and set it on his desk. "Marvelous, really nice, wonderful, awesome, really friendly, really sweet, exciting, now you're 30, happy birthday." "See," Britt says, "it spells out Mr. Warren on the side." Britt's poem gave Mike an idea. He could do one like it. He could spell out happy birthday. He got out another piece of paper and wrote a big H on the first line. Then he tried to think of a good H word, but all he could think of was horse and hippo and Halloween. That kind of poem was harder than he thought. Britt looked over at his paper. "You better not copy my idea," she said. Mike crumpled up his paper. He'd never be able to think of enough words anyways. "Is everybody finished?" Mrs. Banks asked. Mike put Nate's poem in his desk. Tonight he'd try to write a poem for Mr. Warren, but he'd keep Nate's poem just in case. The class talked about food for the party. "I don't care what kind of cake we get," Fred said, "just so it has lots of frosting." Mike didn't listen to the talk. He was watching Sam. Sam still had his hand inside his desk, and he had a big smile on his face. When the party plans were finished, Mrs. Banks had them get out their math books. Mike worked for a while, then pushed down hard on his pencil and broke the lead. He got up and went to the pencil sharpener. Mrs. Banks had her back turned. She was looking in the file cabinet. Mike stopped beside Sam's desk. "Let me see your frog, Sam." "You're going to get me in trouble," said Sam. "Let me see it." Sam took a hot tamales candy box out of his desk. He opened one end and stuck a finger inside. "This is Ernie," Sam whispered. Mike put his hand under the box. He wanted to hold the frog, but a snake came sliding out. Mike yanked his hand back. The snake wasn't as big round as Mike's pencil, but it was still a little scary. Its red tongue kept flicking out. "You want to pet him?" Sam asked. Mike didn't, but he reached out a finger, slowly. "Mike," Mrs. Banks called out, "what are you doing?" "I have to sharpen my pencil." Mike hurried down the aisle. Mrs. Banks looked up at him. Mike felt his stomach get tight. "Make it quick," she said. "And no visiting along the way." She reached into the file cabinet again. Mike sharpened his pencil and went straight back to his desk. And here's a picture of him almost getting caught. See the snake's tongue sticking out? Whoops. He waved at Ernie when he went by Sam's desk, but he didn't even slow down. He wasn't taking any chances. This time he wasn't going to get anybody in trouble. He'd show them he could keep a secret. Chapter 4. Amy had a hard time writing her poem. As soon as Mrs. Banks told them not to do roses or red poems, she thought of one right away, and she couldn't get it out of her mind. Roses are red, grass is green. I saw you kiss Miss Dean. Oh, Amy held her hand over her mouth to keep from laughing out loud. She wished Sarah was here. Sarah would love that poem. Amy and Sarah used to make up silly jump rope rhymes. They'd start laughing and forget to jump. Sitting there at her desk, Amy thought of a jump rope rhyme that Sarah would love. Here comes the doctor, here comes the preacher. I saw you kiss the kindergarten teacher. Amy laughed out loud. People turned and looked at her. Amy felt her face get hot. She looked down at the blank paper on her desk. What's so funny? Nate asked her. Nothing, Amy said, but she almost laughed out loud again. You're having trouble thinking of a poem? Nate asked. Sort of, Amy said. Listen to mine, Nate said. Hope your birthday's great. Your friend great, Nate. I'd write one for you, but nothing rhymes with Amy. I'll think of something, Amy said. Amy saw Sam putting his hand inside his desk. She was sure he had another frog. Mrs. Banks walked around the room looking at some of the poems. Amy picked up her pencil. Maybe she'd do a haiku. Haiku were little poems, 3 lines, 17 syllables. That wouldn't be hard. She wrote down a poem, then counted syllables. She had to change some words, but finally it came out right. Mr. Warren smiles when he eats a giant piece of pink birthday cake. Amy read over the poem. It wasn't bad, but everybody else had probably done a haiku too. She wanted to do something special. She'd try again at home. While Mrs. Banks talked about the party, Amy looked back at Sam. She saw him take a little box out of his desk for a minute, then put it back. She wondered what the frog looked like. Maybe if she asked Sam, he'd show it to her. Then they did math papers. Amy finished hers right away. She was good at numbers. Sometimes when she was waiting for something, she played number games in her head. There were 26 kids in her class. If there were 2 classes, there would be 52. 3 classes, there'd be 78. 4 classes, Mike got up from his desk. He held his pencil over his head so Mrs. Banks would know what he was doing. But he stopped by Sam's desk. Amy saw Sam take the box out of his desk, and she saw Mike jump back. That surprised her. She didn't think Mike would be afraid of frogs. It must be a really big one. When the bell rang, Mrs. Banks said, Okay, it's softball today. Everybody go to the softball field. Goody, Carla said. She was great at softball. Yuck, Amy said to herself. She hated playing softball with the boys. They got mad if you struck out, which she usually did, and they yelled at you and made you nervous. And there were too many players on each team, so ones like Amy ended up in the outfield. What kind of game was that with 6 or 7 outfielders? Amy stopped to fix the bouquet on Mrs. Banks' desk. Some of the roses were hanging crooked. Let's go, Amy, Mrs. Banks said as she went out the door. I'll be right there, she said. She kept working on the flowers. Everybody else was gone. She liked being in the room by herself. It was much better than being on the softball field. Sometimes it was nice being alone. Alone. She looked over at Sam's desk. Then she glanced at the door. She could get a quick peek at the frog, and nobody would ever know. It was sneaky to look in someone else's desk, but she wouldn't touch anything, except the frog. Sam wouldn't care if she petted the frog, but he wouldn't find out anyway. She hurried down the aisle to Sam's desk. The lid of the desk was raised up 2 inches. A book was holding it open. She could see the box inside the desk. Amy looked around. She felt funny. She knew this was wrong, but she was too curious to stop, and the box was sitting right there. She reached inside with 2 fingers and pulled out the box. She shook it gently. Something moved in there. Amy opened the end of the box just a little and tried to peek inside, but she couldn't see anything. She opened the flap a little more and a little more. Then she tipped up the box. Come on out, Froggy, she said quietly. I know you're in there. And she moved the flap back and peeked inside. A snake's head popped out of the box about 1 inch from her eye. Yikes, Amy said, dropping the box onto Sam's chair. She wasn't really afraid of snakes, but she had been expecting a little frog. The snake's head slid back inside the box. Amy looked at the box for a minute. She didn't want to touch it, but she couldn't leave it there on the chair. She grabbed the box and pushed it back into the desk. The flap wasn't quite closed, but she didn't want to put her hand in there. She ran out the door, then walked down the steps. She was still a little scared. She was never going to get into Sam's desk again, not for anything. The softball game had already started. Amy walked very slowly. Maybe she wouldn't have to play. Maybe they'd let her keep score. Here comes Amy, Fred yelled. You guys have to take her. No way, another boy yelled. We already have all the other crummy players. You get her. Amy hoped Mrs. Banks wouldn't stop the game and talk to the boys about being mean. they would make things even worse. Amy hated softball. And there's a picture of her finding the snake about an inch from her eye. All right, my friends, we'll stop there. We'll start chapter 5 next time. All right, we'll see you later. Bye.